is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe. Live from CGTN in London, I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories: diplomats from China and the United States prepare for a second day of high-level talks in Alaska. Will tensions thaw after a frosty start?
Our other headlines: nearly a dozen countries resume AstraZeneca COVID vaccinations after European regulators say the benefits outweigh the risks.
Germany rethinks relaxing lockdowns amid rising coronavirus cases.
10 years on and thousands of miles, new departures for the first freight train linking China and Europe.
And the bare necessities, the museum dedicated entirely to the wonderful world of pandas. China is blaming the United States for the confrontational tone set at the start of high-level talks in Alaska. Beijing accused US officials of provocation during opening remarks, which led to a heated exchange over the course of an hour.
Well, the rather rare public display highlights the tension between these two superpowers. Top officials are due to arrive in Anchorage in the next hour or so for another round of talks.
Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State has announced that he will travel to Brussels on Monday. Antony Blinken says he wants to reaffirm America's commitment to Europe on their shared agenda. And high on that agenda is, of course, China. Our correspondent Tony Waterman joins us now from Brussels. So, Tony, this Europe trip comes on hot on the heels of the Alaska meeting. Is the timing significant?
Well, it's certainly not a mere coincidence. I mean, we're talking about Antony Blinken traveling from the westernmost reaches of the continental U.S. Over to Europe, and his office making it very clear that concerns about China, their words, will be on the agenda. And though that's not going to be the only thing that they're going to be talking about during this four-day visit, as you mentioned, there is a desire here to patch up the transatlantic relationship, which came under immense strain under the former Trump administration. There have been some baby steps to rectify that, some tariffs being suspended when it comes to the Boeing Airbus spat, but certainly the Trump administration clashing quite a bit with European leaders. So they're going to try to mend that relationship. And Antony Blinken is expected to attend the NATO foreign ministers meeting. They will be discussing China, but they're also going to be talking about climate change, about cybersecurity, countering terrorism. So there are a lot of things to talk about. He's also expected to meet with the Commission chief, Ursula von der Leyen, and High Representative Josep Borrell. The pandemic will take center stage in those discussions at a time when Brussels is really struggling to get assurances from the United States that they will continue to export vaccines and also raw materials to make vaccines over to Europe. So there's a lot to discuss in what is the first face-to-face meeting between a high-ranking official in the Biden administration, which could potentially pave the way for there to be a visit by President Biden himself.
And Tony, as we've been reporting, the meeting in Anchorage was pretty tense, both America and China clashing over a number of issues. Where does the European Union fit into this?
Well, the EU and the United States certainly align when it comes to a lot of things that pertain to China. They both share similar concerns about Xinjiang and also Hong Kong. Of course, China says this is an internal matter and tells Brussels and Washington not to throw stones from their glass houses. And it doesn't appear that Brussels is very likely to try and step into the fray of this very tense meeting because it has its own objectives when it comes to China. It is very diligently working to make sure that the new investment deal makes it through Parliament so that it can be signed and put in place. It also sees China as this very crucial player when it comes to tackling climate change. And don't forget that Europe is intent at the moment when it comes to strategic autonomy, to stand on its own 2 feet, to be more independent and not be blindly kowtowing to the United States. So there are a lot of things that they have in common, but certainly not everything is perfectly aligned. And in some cases, this actually breeds some tension between Washington and Brussels.
Tony Waterman in Brussels. Many thanks indeed.
OK, well, that's the European perspective on the China-US talks. Let us take you now to our correspondent, Mark New, who is in Anchorage for us. Mark, a pretty difficult first day. How did it all unfold?
That's right. I'm in front of the hotel captain session. The third session is going to be shortly. Very aggressive approach right from the start. This was committed.
Well, I'm terribly sorry about that. We have a few problems there with our live link to Anchorage. It's not the easiest place to broadcast from. It's freezing cold, and those high buildings often cause problems with the satellite feed. But we will come back to our correspondent, Mark New, as soon as we get the link a little later in the show. Well, the relationship between China and the United States reached something of a low point under the Trump presidency. Many commentators hope for a reset. This summit is at least the beginning of face-to-face dialogue, even if it's got off to a rather ill-tempered start. I've been talking to the veteran China watcher Isabel Hilton and asked her what she made of it so far.
Both sides were playing to domestic audiences, and they've been playing to domestic audiences in the build-up to this meeting, as well as in the opening moments of the meeting. And I think that partly explained the animosity, the visible animosity in the opening moments. You know, there have been unhelpful moves on both sides, which really can't contribute to a productive meeting. So the only explanation is that, you know, nationalism on both sides demands that each be seen to stand up to the other. Now, these are two enormous global players, and they have a global responsibility to find cooperation where they can. So if there isn't another process going on behind the scenes, it's frankly pretty disappointing for the rest of the world. We need them to cooperate on things like climate change, on things like global health, and certainly they would have to get past what we saw in the opening moments in order to do that.
I guess there was a pretty widespread assumption that the Trump presidency saw the bottom of this relationship, its deepest depths, and surely the new administration would mark the start of a reset. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case, I guess.
Well, it's also been evident that the unhappiness with China is bipartisan in the United States. And, you know, we are now in a confrontation between the US and China, which will be long-lasting, but that doesn't necessarily mean there are no areas for cooperation. What hasn't changed with the Biden presidency is the tariffs. He hasn't done anything about that. What has changed, if you like, is the approach. There's clearly the United States is trying to rebuild alliances both in Europe and in Asia, and indeed this trip comes at the end of a trip across Asia by the American participants. So we have a change in, if you like, methodology, a change in understanding of how the world works from the Trump administration, but not necessarily a change in the perception that China is a strategic challenge to the United States and must be met with a robust, a robust response.
OK, well, let's have another go and try to cross live to our correspondent, Mark New, who's in Anchorage for us. Mark, as we were saying, a pretty difficult first day. You're there. How did it all unfold?
That's right. The U.S. took an aggressive approach from the very start, saying the U.S. was committed to strengthening the rules-based international order. They also said the relationship with China would be competitive where it should be, collaborative where it can be, and adversarial where it must be. Some words perhaps foreshadowing what was to come. Jake Sullivan followed up with a statement saying the concerns over assault on basic values. Yang Jiechi followed mentioning each country had its own style and that no attempt to smear China's social system would get anywhere, and that the U.S. has its own problems with human rights. State Councilor Wang urged the U.S. not to interfere in China's internal affairs. Let's take a look at some of the exchanges.
这种粗暴干涉中国内政的 The U.S.'s gross interference in China's internal affairs has triggered the righteous indignation of the Chinese people. And of course, we're firmly opposed to these actions. Although Anchorage is a halfway point between China and the U.S., it is still the U.S., and we accepted the U.S. invitation to come here. But the day before we arrived, the U.S. slapped new sanctions on China. I don't think this is the way you should normally treat a guest.
Now, these exchanges all took place before the media, and so both sides kind of pointed fingers at each other, claiming that they overstepped their time and sort of didn't follow the protocols. So a very rocky way to start off the initial talks.
I have to tell you, what I'm hearing is very different from what you described. I'm hearing deep satisfaction that the United States is back, that we're re-engaged with our allies and partners. I'm also hearing deep concern about some of the actions your government is taking.
More fiery words again, exchanges that led to a lot of open confrontations, but when things closed up, perhaps business got back to normal. Jamie.
Mark, despite the public display, a U.S. official said behind closed doors the talks were substantive, serious and direct, and the talks ran longer than planned. I mean, I wonder what we can expect today. Do you think the two sides here can find some sort of kinder common ground?
Well, that is the hope. I mean, at least they all came back each time, and they are coming back. Nobody walked out. So sort of a sign that, you know, behind closed doors, things are happening. Still a lot of outstanding issues to talk about, especially climate change, where the two can find some common ground as the two leaders on carbon emissions, and both with goals of being carbon neutral, one China by 2060 and the U.S. by 2050. Also, outstanding trade issues. The hope there is that we can bridge the gap of the tariffs that still exist and the sort of hostile climate that started under the Trump administration. Also, security issues and technology, with all the actions taken by the U.S. government in coming into this, labeling national security threats, 5 Chinese companies, and also the measures by the FCC to actually stop the authorization of Chinese telecoms from operating in the United States. President Joe Biden was actually asked for his reaction on the talks, and he said that I'm very proud of the Secretary of State. Back to you, Jamie.
Mark New in Anchorage. Thank you very much.
The United States has appealed against a decision by the World Trade Organization, which says Washington should revise duties imposed on South Korea. The White House started levying them on steel and power transformers in 2016. It's unclear when the case will be heard by the WTO, which currently does not have a functioning appeals court. UK government borrowing continues to set new records. It reached $26.6 billion in February, the highest figure for that month since records began in 1993. However, it wasn't as high as some experts had forecast. British Airways says it's considering selling its headquarters. A switch to home working during the pandemic means the airline no longer needs as much office space. The sale could boost BA's finances, which have been hammered by travel restrictions. The complex near London Heathrow Airport was completed in 1998 at a cost of nearly $280 million. Lamborghini has reported record sales for last year with high demand from China. The luxury Italian car brand made $1.9 billion in revenue. That's despite closing its factories for more than 2 months. The firm's CEO says China is expected to become its second largest market this year, replacing Germany. And junior bankers at Goldman Sachs have warned that they might quit unless their working conditions improve. A survey organised by some first-year employees in the United States showed that they averaged a 95-hour working week while sleeping just 5 hours a night. The bank says it's working to address the concerns.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Britain's Prime Minister urges people to get vaccinated as he stresses the safety of the AstraZeneca jab.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
And welcome back to Global Business Europe, live from London. A reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online, on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. Also on YouTube and Daily Motion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Several European countries are resuming the use of the AstraZeneca jab after the European Medicines Agency confirmed it was safe and effective. The regulator reviewed the vaccine amid fears about blood clots, but said the benefits outweigh any risks. Germany, France, Indonesia and others halted inoculations following reports of around 30 cases of blood clots in vaccinated people under the age of 50. The regulators said a link between blood clots and the shot could not be definitively ruled out and that it will continue its scrutiny, but urged countries to resume vaccinations.
Meanwhile, Germany's health minister says rising infections could mean lockdown measures being reimposed. Our correspondent Trent Murray is live in Berlin. So, Trent, earlier this month, Germany was examining ways to reopen its economy, but things look now to be shifting in the other direction.
Yeah, that's certainly right, Paul. There's quite a bit of anticipation building here for this coming Monday when a new round of restrictions were set to be loosened. Things like outdoor dining were going to be allowed and even cinemas and theatres allowed to reopen. But those plans have all now been put on ice. Of course, as you say, a major resurgence of coronavirus here has pushed case numbers up significantly. In fact, we've just heard in the last couple of hours that Hamburg, Germany's second biggest city, well, it is immediately going back into a hard lockdown as of this weekend. It means things like schools and retail stores that had only opened this week, well, they will be forced to close their doors once again. But of course, the main weapon in the fight against coronavirus does remain vaccines. And lawmakers just behind me in the German parliament are really trying to encourage German citizens to get the vaccine, including the one from AstraZeneca. Leading that charge, the German health minister.
Germany's health minister steps in front of the cameras to offer assurance.
The EMA decision confirms the safety and efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccine. This is good news. I say very clearly that vaccinations with AstraZeneca should continue.
This public backing follows an earlier decision by the country's health regulator to suspend the use of the AstraZeneca jab, citing several cases of blood clots in people who were vaccinated. But with the European Medicines Agency giving the vaccine the green light, Berlin is pushing Germany's 16 states to help get the vaccine campaign back on track.
Our goal, and this is the joint goal of the federal government and all 16 German states, is that vaccinations with AstraZeneca should begin again.
That call to arms has become even more urgent as coronavirus cases continue to climb. The latest data shows COVID-19 cases climbed by 36% in Germany on Friday when compared to the same day last week. It's clear the long-feared third wave has well and truly arrived, but with only 8.5% of the population given their first dose of a vaccine, pressure is now well and truly mounting to dramatically speed up the vaccine rollout. In a sign of the growing urgency, Chancellor Merkel convened a meeting of state premiers Friday to discuss the vaccine campaign, including bringing forward plans to allow GP surgeries to administer the jab. They will also meet again on Monday to debate lockdown rules. While many were hoping measures might be relaxed in time for the Easter break, there are fears of a third wave now, and yet more punishing lockdowns for many weeks to come.
So, Trent, how is the vaccine rollout going in Germany?
Well, Paul, I think the answer to your question really lies in the numbers. I mean, the latest tally is around 7 million people have been given their first dose of a vaccine in Germany. You compare that to the UK, where it's 25 million. It's, of course, worth remembering Germany has a much bigger population, around 83 million people here versus around 66 in the UK. So it's not going very well. It's still well behind where they would like it to be. For a really long time, they had been blaming supply chain issues as the reason for the delay. But the latest data shows there's around 2.2 million vaccine doses sitting in refrigerators right now across the country. A lot of questions being asked about the campaign can't be sped up and get those doses out of the fridge and into people's arms. I think you can really feel now the political pressure over this is really growing, especially as people here are asked to once again be a little bit patient with another lockdown. It's becoming a really quite a prickly issue for Chancellor Merkel and her lawmakers.
OK, thanks for that, Trent. Trent Murray in Berlin.
The French Prime Minister has received his vaccination against COVID-19. Jean Castex received the AstraZeneca jab following its reapproval in France. Castex also announced that large parts of the country would go back into a limited lockdown as coronavirus infections are rising. Ross Cullen reports now from Paris.
Just over a year on from the first coronavirus lockdown in France, and another springtime shutdown is being introduced. The third wave of infections and intense pressure on hospitals has forced the government to act. And a new limited confinement starts this weekend, affecting 21 million French citizens in cities like Lille, Nice and Paris.
I'm disappointed. It's not right. It's not fair. This will affect the summer and delay the reopening of restaurants and nightclubs. It should be all of France and not just some cities.
It's a sacrifice we have to make so we can then have more freedom later on. It's a sacrifice, but we will come through this.
The situation is very difficult. We hope with the vaccine, we have a hope now. Last year we did not have hope about the vaccine, so we hope it will work.
Unlike the first coronavirus lockdown in spring 2020, schools will stay open, along with food stores, pharmacies, hairdressers and bookshops. Non-essential stores like clothes shops will have to shut.
The government has sought to underline how this will not be as restrictive a lockdown as previous confinements. The current national curfew will continue, but it's been relaxed slightly, and people will be able to walk or exercise as much as they like during the day.
The French government is hoping the lockdown will slow the spread of infections, but it knows it must also up the pace of its vaccination programme. And on Friday, the Prime Minister tried to demonstrate the AstraZeneca vaccine's safety by having the shot himself. Jean Castex is 55 with no underlying health conditions, and so he was not due to get the jab. But he's seeking to revive falling public confidence in the vaccine. Now that the European drugs regulator has approved the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Anglo-Swedish pharmaceutical company's injection can be used once more in hospitals and pharmacies.
Unfortunately, right now, France is behind other European countries, but with more doses, we will catch up. All health professionals know how to vaccinate people, and so in a short space of time, we should be able to rectify this delay and vaccinate a very large number of people.
The French government had been hoping to avoid a major new lockdown, betting that the nationwide curfew would be sufficient. But that wager seems to have been lost, as the rate of infections rises and the number of people in intensive care increases, with no let-up in the pressure on the hospital system. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Well, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is also due to receive the AstraZeneca vaccine today. His appointment was publicised to boost confidence in the COVID-19 jab after some people cancelled their appointments. Yola Abdavid reports.
Boris Johnson has suffered from COVID and is about to be vaccinated. Despite many criticisms how the pandemic has been handled in the UK, the vaccination push seems to be working smoothly.
Oxford jab is safe and the Pfizer jab is safe.
In his last briefing, he emphasised why vaccines are crucial.
The thing that isn't safe is catching COVID, which is why it's so important that we all get our jabs as soon as our turn comes.
The government has promised that everyone older than 50 will be vaccinated in the next 4 weeks. More than 25 million people have been vaccinated with either AstraZeneca or Pfizer vaccines. And despite concerns in other European countries about the jab and a likely drop in supply in the coming weeks, the constant message from the government is that every adult will be vaccinated at least once before the end of July. A stream of newly vaccinated people came out of this London hotel, complimenting the number of staff working there and the speed at which they received their first jab.
I have absolutely no anxiety about being vaccinated. The only thing I would be worried about is how my body personally would respond to the vaccine, whether I would be really ill with it in terms of would I feel really flu-y. But other than that, I have no anxieties and no worries. In fact, I actually feel the opposite.
If there's a reaction to being off for a couple of days, then so be it. I mean, that's what a vaccine does, really. It gives you a little bit of the infection to actually make you immune to it.
The government is also considering a COVID-19 certification to allow people to attend large-scale public events from June the 21st. Different pilot schemes are being discussed to see how people could return safely to sporting and cultural events.
If all goes well and vaccine remains on track as it is and we keep the disease under control, by the 17th of May we'll be back to the sort of things that we saw last summer, so socially distanced performances, indoor and outdoor. And then the big step forward will be on the 21st of June, which will be the point at which we want to get as much back as we possibly can.
No final decisions have been taken yet. It will depend on more people getting vaccinated and fewer COVID variations being found in Britain. Yola Abdavid, CGTN, London.
Coronavirus cases in Poland have now passed the 2 million mark. The country has struggled with a surge in cases linked to the virus variant first found in Britain, which the health ministry says is behind more than 60% of cases. Warsaw will bring in tighter restrictions, with theatres, shopping centres, hotels and cinemas set to close until after Easter. A national lockdown could be brought in if case numbers continue to rise.
Like Poland, Hungary and other Central and Eastern European nations are also struggling with a third wave of the virus. Despite a strong vaccine drive that has seen Hungary inoculate 1.5 million people, the government says it can't lift restrictions until at least another 1 million people have had a jab. Penelope Liash has this report from Budapest.
For the third day in a row, Hungary has recorded a record number of COVID-19 deaths. 213 people have passed away in just the past 24 hours, and the number of infections is nearing a total of 550,000. Experts say numbers could still rise tremendously as the highly transmissible B.1.1.7 variant, originally identified in the UK, becomes the dominant strain. But it's understood the country is nearing the peak of this third wave. Still, the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, reminding people why restrictions can't be loosened.
The restrictive measures in force will remain unchanged from Monday for another week for sure. We are in the third wave of the pandemic. The numbers are record high. Epidemiologists have said that this is not the moment to relax the measures in place.
Despite the record numbers, there is some hope, with the Prime Minister alluding to a free summer, saying a gradual reopening of the country can begin once 2.5 million people have been vaccinated. So far, close to 1.5 million have had a vaccine. Hungary is far from alone. In nearby Poland, the total number of COVID cases on Friday surpassed 2 million, with nearly 26,000 new cases recorded. On Saturday, the country will enter a stricter lockdown, with theatres, shopping centres, hotels and cinemas forced to close until after the Easter holidays. In the Czech Republic, it's being proposed Parliament extend the country's state of emergency until at least early April to ensure restrictions on the freedom of movement. It comes after more than 10,500 new COVID cases were recorded on Thursday, a slight drop compared to the week before. However, the health system is still considered to be near collapse, with intensive care units across the country nearing capacity. Patients are being moved between hospitals to help ease the pressure. Penelope Liesch, CGTN, Budapest.
A Chinese grandmother who was the victim of an assault in San Francisco has been praised for her bravery after she fought back against her attacker. Xie Zhazhen, who's lived in San Francisco for 26 years, was punched by a man on the street. She fought back with a stick before her attacker, seen here on the stretcher, was arrested. The incident comes amid a rise in reports of attacks against Asian Americans.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead.
China is our most important market.
Record revenue for Porsche in 2020 as the company's CEO eyes further expansion in the world's largest car market.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time, because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first 2 epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, read you loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, and this idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we try to save the world. We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Hi there, and welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Paul Barber. Our headlines again. Top diplomats from China and the US prepare for a second day of high-level talks in Alaska after a frosty start on Thursday.
Our other headlines. In the last hour, the World Health Organization has said data from the AstraZeneca vaccination does not point to any increase in blood clotting, but it will continue to monitor it.
And Germany rethinks relaxing lockdowns amid rising coronavirus cases.
Well, let's take you back to our top story now, and Chinese and United States officials are due to start a second day of high-level talks within the next half hour or so. This is the first meeting face-to-face between the two countries since Joe Biden became president. The first day didn't get off to a terribly good start. Beijing accused Washington of inciting countries to attack China. The United States claimed Chinese officials had arrived at the summit intent on grandstanding.
Well, one group likely to be watching the US-China talks closely are American farmers. They were severely impacted by the recent trade dispute. But agriculture is now surging, thanks in part to the Phase 1 trade agreement signed last year. Dan Williams reports from Illinois.
John Keifner prepares for the new planting season. A third-generation farmer in Manhattan, Illinois, Keifner mainly grows soybeans and corn on his 240-hectare farm. But the last few years have been a challenge.
Farmers tend to be very optimistic, but we had multiple years in a row where we just saw income creeping lower and lower and lower. And then came the trade war and some pretty stark predictions.
But 2020 saw a rebound. Despite pressures from the COVID-19 pandemic, agricultural commodity prices are surging. And one of the key reasons, record volumes of exports to China. Last year, China purchased more than 55 million tons of US agricultural products, making up around a quarter of all farm shipments. It follows last year's Phase 1 trade agreement between China and the US that includes a pledge from China to purchase roughly $80 billion in agricultural products over 2 years.
Their buying has been very meaningful and very significant on the multiple fronts, be it corn, soybeans, pork, even ethanol. It's real, and it does make a big difference to the American farmer to have that demand sitting out there wanting our product.
Although trade was severely disrupted due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, China was once again the top US trading partner in 2020.
Although the outlook for US farmers is more positive, few would be getting carried away just yet. Commodity prices might be high now, but many would likely have sold last year's crop before this year's price surge.
Keifner was among those to sell at harvest time.
I was one of those farmers that just started selling very aggressively. And one of the reasons the price is still very strong is many farmers have sold. Literally every time I sold, and I sold in some increments, a couple weeks later it got better. So I just sold more, and then it finally ran out of grain to sell.
As China and the US hold talks in Alaska, the focus for agriculture is on the long-term trade relationship and whether the two countries can continue to find ways to do business.
Permanence in that relationship would be great. A sense of where are we going to be with China in 5 or 10 years? Can we continue to count on them as a really good market and make investments according to that? And can they count on us as being a reasonable, fair, trading partner? I think those are questions both sides would like to have answered.
For now, though, for farmers across the country, the more immediate goal is a perennial one for farmers everywhere, growing a crop to sell and hope the market stays buoyant come harvest time. Dan Williams, CGTN, Manhattan, Illinois.
The Russian President Vladimir Putin has offered to hold live online talks with US President Joe Biden. Russia's suggestion comes after Biden stated publicly that he thought Putin was a killer. Biden's comments saw Russia's ambassador to Washington recalled for consultations. Speaking to reporters, Putin said that both leaders should not be talking behind each other's backs.
We must continue our relationship. Moreover, I just thought about this. Last time the initiative of the telephone conversation came from President Biden. I want to invite Biden to continue this discussion, but on condition that we do it live, online, without any delay, in an open, direct discussion. I think it would be interesting.
Now, it's a journey of several thousand miles. 10 years ago today, the first freight train route linking China and Europe was opened. Connecting the Chinese city of Chongqing and Duisburg in Germany, the project is part of China's vision to boost infrastructure links along the ancient Silk Road. More routes from different cities have been launched since then. The number of trips per year has rocketed from an initial 17 to more than 12,000. That means a freight train is departing every 43 minutes. Despite the pandemic, $50 billion worth of goods were transported last year. They include cars, electronics and clothes. Last year, 76,000 tonnes of medical supplies were sent from China to Europe. Well, with more, Ryan Thompson reports from Germany.
This is Hansi, the small locomotive.
Go Little Hansi Go is a children's story about global trade.
Choo-choo, Hansi whistles, looking forward to the adventures, and leaves Wuhan.
An adorable German-Chinese freight train that travels halfway around the world. After leaving China, Hansi steadily makes his way through Kazakhstan, Russia and Belarus before pulling into his final destination, Germany.
It shows in the book how you go to several countries, several climatic zones, but not to see the foreign aspect as a threat, just as a new inspiration.
But this is no fairy tale. It's the very real story of Chinese-German economic cooperation that sent goods back and forth for what's now a decade. The German city of Duisburg is where many of these trains arrive. Every week, nearly 40 trains arrive here from China. They're carrying anything and everything, auto parts, electronics, even diapers. And they're doing it in about 1/3 of the time of sea cargo, roughly 14 to 16 days. European trade with China reached record levels in 2020. Exports of EU goods increased by 2.2%, and imports went up 5.6%. China is now the bloc's biggest trading partner, and ports like this have become a key logistic hub to get goods to the rest of the continent.
The containers arrive here and then go back, or to other trains, and can be distributed in other ways, to Spain, France, Austria, Italy. Of course, all this enormously increases the frequency of the trains that come to Duisburg.
At its start in March 2011, direct freight trains from China arrived only a few times a week. But billions of dollars in subsidies from Beijing over 10 years have made it an increasingly attractive way to connect the two economies. Chinese imports reign over European exports, but new opportunities are giving German firms a way to reach Chinese consumers.
We are currently building a platform for e-commerce with China. It will enable medium-sized German companies to gain a foothold there. They would be too small to be able to handle this on their own.
And that cooperation has spread to other corners of Germany's most populous state.
North Rhine-Westphalia is the #1 investment location for China in Germany, with over 1,200 Chinese companies investing here.
But a worldwide shortage of empty containers threatens to stunt the pace of this growth. Shipping costs between China and Europe have quadrupled since the end of last year. And though the real-life Hansi might not carry as much cargo these days, more firms than ever are interested. And this pioneer little train with big ambitions is certainly here to stay. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Duisburg.
Well, let's stay on the railways because the world's largest shipping company wants to diversify its business. Last year, Maersk arranged over 200 China-Europe intercontinental cargo trains. Christo Petkov, head of pharmaceuticals at Maersk, talked to CGTN about the growth potential of this rail corridor.
Rail freight is extremely important for us to bring flexibility to our customers, to give them alternative solutions and to think out of the box. We have been able to come up with solutions in very fast turnaround times. We have provided PPE equipment, very important PPE equipment for Poland, for the central supplier of Poland to distribute within the country. We have come up with other rail freight solutions, so our growth is very interesting. Compared to last year, we have grown threefold and more. And we are not only deploying rail freight from China into Europe. Since the second quarter of last year, we also started deploying solutions from Europe to China.
I want to talk a little bit more about that connection between
China and Europe? I mean, what capacity do you currently have, and what's the future looking like? I know you haven't got your crystal ball, but give us a taste of what's to come.
I think that's a really good question, and that's a very hard one to tackle. When you look in the beginning of last year, there was very little demand in the first quarter. Later on in the year, the demand really exploded and surprised everybody in the market. Looking into container vessel capacity, looking into container equipment capacity, looking into the operations of the ports, there's a lot of constraints that are not necessarily driven only by ocean, purely by ocean, but all the supportive infrastructure in the market that is responsible to speed up ocean delivery. Right now, what we see is the delivery on ocean is not great. It's nothing we can be proud of, but I can assure you that we're doing our best to deal with this unfortunate situation and to give a better and better product to our customers. The connection with China is extremely important. What we see is they have a huge demand in terms of refrigerated cargo, temperature control cargo. They produce a lot, and there's huge exports from China. So this is something that our executives are for sure looking into, and together with our customers, we're trying to find the best solutions for them. It's very important that we cater for the needs of China. For example, we have seen the efforts and the persistence China has had throughout the beginning of the pandemic to keep important operations running, important infrastructure in a safe, secure, hygiene way in order to be able to deliver products to Europe, for example. The very much needed personal protective equipment that is produced in China, I mean, is great. We can all learn from them.
Porsche is speeding ahead despite the pandemic. The car maker set a revenue record of $34 billion last year. Nearly 90,000 cars were sold, 1/3 of those in China. The luxury German automaker expects to significantly increase sales of electric vehicles. Porsche CEO Oliver Blume has been speaking to CGTN.
China is our most important market. In 2020, we delivered almost 90,000 cars to our Chinese customers, an increase of 3% compared to 2019. Our local team has been growing from less than 10 colleagues in 2001 to over 400 in 2020. This is the reason why we had to relocate our office several times. By 2030, more than 80% of our new cars will have an electric motor. China has the world's largest market for electric cars, and the country is pioneering digitalization, autonomous driving, and connectivity. These are all important topics for Porsche. That's why we are increasing our R&D investment in China, and we are looking forward to working together with Chinese customers and partners to shape the future of sports cars.
Everything you ever wanted to know about cryptocurrency this weekend, but were afraid to ask. The rise, fall and rise again of Bitcoin has been one of the key financial stories of the year. But are cryptocurrencies an all too volatile investment bubble ready to burst, or are they here to stay? Gavin Brown at the University of Liverpool has been talking to CGTN's Stephen Cole.
There's really a three-way competition at the moment for the future of money. We've got decentralized currencies such as cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, etc. We've also got central bank digital currencies, which is really the nation states recognizing this external threat and starting to come up with their own versions of these currencies to try and almost, rather than fighting and regulating and attempting to frustrate these technologies, why not introduce a more mainstream technology which is more conducive to your citizenship, and hopefully that will drive adoption and keep the threat of something like Bitcoin away. And then finally, we've got the idea of corporate currencies. So this would be the idea of people like Facebook and JP Morgan already either having launched or planning to launch their own currencies. So the future of money is certainly very exciting at the moment and is very much up for grabs in terms of what the future might hold.
And you can see more of that interview in the agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
This is CGTN, still ahead. Everything you've ever wanted to know about pandas laid out in black and white. The new museum dedicated to a rather special bear.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Indonesia has called for the restoration of democracy in Myanmar as more civilians are killed by security forces. 9 people were shot dead during a demonstration against last month's military takeover. At least 233 protesters have now been killed in weeks of violence. Indonesia's president has called on Southeast Asian leaders to hold crisis talks. The Myanmar army has defended its takeover, alleging voter fraud in November's election, although it has not provided any evidence. The government of Afghanistan and the Taliban have agreed to speed up peace talks. It came after an international conference held in Moscow in which China, Pakistan, Russia and the United States called on the two sides to declare an immediate ceasefire. The conference comes 6 weeks ahead of a deadline set for the withdrawal of United States troops. The trial of a Canadian businessman accused of espionage has ended in China. Michael Spavor is one of 2 Canadians arrested 2 years ago, days after Canada detained Meng Wanzhou, a senior executive at Chinese tech giant Huawei. China has denied the cases are linked. A Canadian diplomat says he was denied access to the trial, which ended without a verdict. China says trials concerning state secrets are not open to the public. Tanzania has sworn in its first female president. The former vice president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, called for national unity after taking her oath following the death of President John Magufuli. Hassan must now decide if her government will buy COVID-19 vaccines, something her predecessor was unwilling to do until the country's experts reviewed them. Rural communities in the Australian state of New South Wales say they're suffering their worst plague of mice for decades. This footage shows thousands of mice swarming around a farm in Gilgandra. Supermarkets are now having to store food in sealed containers. Locals are hoping for heavy rain to help drive down the numbers.
Well, staying with animals, but a much-loved one, a breeding and research base in China's southwestern city of Chengdu, the home of the giant panda, has launched an interactive museum dedicated to the bears. Tao Yan reports.
If just looking at these cute, furry creatures isn't enough to get you all worked up, Chengdu's giant panda base is taking their tours to a whole new level with this new museum.
After visiting the pandas in the park, coming to the museum will help answer questions and boost your knowledge about them.
Modern and interactive, the museum aims to give visitors an immersive experience. You can pedal these bikes for a history lesson on the giant panda, whose ancestors date back 8 million years, or watch a hologram to learn how cubs grow. This offers a collection of the different sounds that the giant panda makes when they're in different moods, just to give you a sense of how they're able to communicate with their keepers. And this is perhaps the only chance that anyone has of touching real panda fur.
This museum doesn't want to teach you anything. It wants you to learn through a fun experience.
It's all part of extensive conservation efforts, with the research and breeding facility as a shining example.
Giant pandas actually have aroused most interest and garnered the world attention. So when we talk about giant panda protection, actually we also protect the other species that share with the same habitat with giant pandas.
My favorite animal is panda and red panda. They make funny noises. Sometimes they can climb trees.
I hope he can learning about how love the animal and what the nature is, and the nature is an animal and how the ecosystem is.
The museum is doing its part, and it hopes we can do ours. Taoyuan, CGTN, Chengdu.
Scientists are trying to understand the threat to the environment in Siberia as snow, polluted with microplastics, then melts and seeps into the ground. They say initial findings confirm that airborne plastic fibres are turning up in snow. Microplastics, which are created when bigger pieces of plastic break up, are increasingly being found in the air, in food, drinking water and even Arctic ice. Scientists fear they may pose a risk to human health and marine life. Previously, scientists have found microplastics in the digestive systems of fish caught in Siberian rivers.
And a beach in Yorkshire in the north of England has been marking World Water Day by highlighting the global water shortage. The town has hosted a giant sand painting to be washed away by waves. The portrait, called Sand in Your Eye, shows an Ethiopian child with a water carrier. It's estimated that 600 million children will struggle to access clean water by 2040. To see the painting, europe.cgtn.com.
The headlines again. China and the United States are preparing for a second day of high-level talks in Alaska following a heated exchange during opening remarks. Beijing blamed the United States for the confrontational tone, accusing officials of provoking the dispute, with the US saying China arrived intent on grandstanding. In a rare public display of tension, both sides criticized each other's policies.
The U.S.'s gross interference in China's internal affairs has triggered the righteous indignation of the Chinese people. And of course, we're firmly opposed to these actions. Although Anchorage is a halfway point between China and the U.S., it is still the U.S., and we accepted the U.S. invitation to come here. But the day before we arrived, the U.S. slapped new sanctions on China. I don't think this is the way you should normally treat a guest.
And that is Global Business Europe. Thank you so much for watching. More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Daily Motion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app. Up next, CGTN America with the latest on those China-US talks. Do stay with us.